When I opened my garage door that Monday morning, I wasn't expecting to find what looked like the lost cargo of a small Amazon warehouse. Towering stacks of cardboard boxes were crammed from wall to wall, blocking my tool shelves, my gym equipment, even my backup fridge, which, by the way, was still running, humming quietly beneath a box marked Zmaz Lights 2008. At first, I genuinely thought I'd been robbed by the world's politest thief. No signs of forced entry. Nothing missing. Just an army of mystery boxes squatting in my garage like they paid rent. I stood there, keys still in hand, staring into the chaos, and all I could think was, is this some weird HOA sacrifice? Like, if I open the wrong one, do I summon Karen? Let me back up. I live in a pretty average suburban neighborhood. Nice lawns, 2-car garages, too many labradoodles. We also have a homeowners association. And heading it with all the enthusiasm of a middle school hall monitor on a power trip is Karen. Yes, her name is actually Karen. The kind of person who once fined a neighbor because his Halloween pumpkin wasn't seasonally neutral in November. The woman has a clipboard, a measuring tape, and binoculars. She calls them her compliance kit. So yeah, not someone you want randomly dumping boxes in your personal space. Naturally, I assumed it had to be a mistake. Maybe the boxes were meant for someone else. Maybe a delivery truck got the addresses mixed up. I checked the garage door lock, still intact. No sign of a break-in. I cautiously approached one of the boxes, pried it open, and found binders, notebooks, paperwork, HOA paperwork. I flipped through one labeled Vendor Logs 2019 to 2022 and immediately saw Karen's signature on nearly every page. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't a mistake. It was a hostile garage takeover. Still trying to process it, I walked over to Karen's house. She lives just 5 houses down, in a place so aggressively beige it could be used in military camo tests. I knocked, waited, and when she opened the door, she gave me that smile she reserves for people who breathe too loudly. Before I could say a word, she chirped, "Oh good, you saw the boxes. I was hoping you wouldn't mind holding on to them for a few weeks." No apology. No explanation. Just smug confidence, like she was doing me a favor by giving my garage a purpose. "It's just temporary," she added. "We needed a secure location for HOA records while we renovate the clubhouse storage room. Now, I'm not unreasonable. I can be a team player. But using someone's garage without asking first? That's not teamwork. That's trespassing." I told her plainly. She had no right to do that, and she needed to remove the boxes immediately. She scoffed like I'd asked her to shovel coal. "Technically," she said, "and I swear this is real, Section 14B of the HOA Charter allows for emergency community storage under board discretion. And I am the board. I asked for the charter. She told me to look it up. I did. There is no Section 14B. The closest thing is a section about paint color restrictions and one about acceptable flag sizes. The kicker? I was out of town for a weekend camping trip. She'd timed it perfectly. Waited until she knew I'd be gone, then used her HOA key access to open the side gate to my backyard, pry open the emergency override on my garage panel, and stash her mess inside like it was some glorified trash closet. She even left a note taped to the side wall. "Thanks. HOA appreciates your service." Like I'd volunteered for jury duty. That night, I sat in my kitchen, rage-eating leftover pizza while glaring at the garage door. My tools were trapped. My gym was blocked. And my backup fridge had a suspicious smell now. I knew I could file a complaint with the HOA, but considering Karen was the HOA, that was like asking a fox to investigate missing chickens. She clearly believed she could get away with anything, and why wouldn't she? Everyone else in the neighborhood just went along with her nonsense. One guy told me she once measured his grass height with a ruler and fined him $50. Another said she banned inflatable holiday decorations because they violated airspace harmony. But this wasn't a flamingo in a yard or a mailbox the wrong shade of taupe. This was my home, my garage, my space. and she'd treated it like her personal warehouse. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, not just anger, but the cold fire of strategy. I wasn't going to yell or beg or file useless complaints. I was going to beat her at her own game. After all, if she wanted to turn my garage into a community drop zone, I'd make sure the community got involved. That night, I walked back into the garage, turned on the overhead light, and looked at those boxes with new eyes. They weren't Karen's property anymore, not as far as I was concerned. She'd abandoned them. She'd trespassed to stash them here. She hadn't asked, hadn't signed anything, and certainly hadn't paid for storage. Legally, and I say this as someone with a law degree, she had zero claim. And that's when the plan clicked into place. I grabbed my phone, opened the Craigslist app, created a listing. Title: Free Mystery Boxes, First Come, First Served. I took pictures of the stacks, carefully avoiding any visible names. Added a line that read, "Stored in my garage by someone who never came back for them. Take what you want. They gotta go." Then I hit publish. I didn't know it at the time, but I just lit the fuse on a neighborhood explosion. Because the next morning, the trucks started rolling in. And Karen? She would lose her mind in ways even I couldn't have predicted. But standing in that garage, staring at those boxes one last time before chaos descended, I couldn't help but smile. She wanted community storage? Well, I was about to give the entire internet a chance to help themselves. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I'd completely forgotten about the listing, at least until the first knock at the door jolted me out of my cereal. A man in a faded tank top, holding a reusable shopping bag and grinning like he'd won the lottery, asked, "You still got them free boxes?" I blinked. "Yeah," I said, slowly pointing to the open garage. He didn't say another word. Just marched right past me and started browsing like it was a garage sale. Within 15 minutes, 3 more people showed up. One of them backed an actual trailer into my driveway. They came with work gloves, dollies, and in one case, a large thermos of coffee like they were prepared for a full day's haul. I stood by the door, arms crossed, watching this parade of opportunists dig through Karen's kingdom of cardboard like raccoons at a buffet, and I have to admit, it was glorious. What surprised me most wasn't that people were showing up, but how fast it spread. Word of mouth in online giveaway groups moves at light speed, apparently. Someone posted about the haul on a local community page. Garage full of free stuff, lots of office supplies and mystery items. That was all it took. Within an hour, cars were double parked down the street. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months wandered by, just to see what the fuss was about. It was like a pop-up market run by chaos itself. People were pulling out boxes, opening them on my lawn, holding up objects and asking, "Is this part of it?" And every time, I smiled and said, "If it's in the garage, it's yours." The real magic happened when people started uncovering what was inside. See, it wasn't just decorations and binders. Some boxes contained weirdly specific HOA documents, financial records, neighborhood security notes, and a few old, dust-covered surveillance cameras. One woman, a retired librarian, opened a crate and gasped. "Are these HOA violation reports from 2015? She pulled out a manila folder labeled, "Unauthorized Mulch Usage, Anderson, Lot 14. People began passing around papers like gossip in a high school hallway. My favorite moment was when a teenager found a box full of laminated photos, dozens of them, of people's lawns taken from odd angles. Someone asked if it was a weird art project. I didn't have the heart to explain that it was probably Karen's personal archive of neighborhood infractions. And then, right around noon, the Lexus appeared. Karen's beige monstrosity rounded the corner and slammed to a stop in front of my house, her mouth already open mid-scream before the engine shut off. She leapt out, practically tripping over her orthopedic sandals, and shouted, "Stop! This is a crime. Those boxes are private property." She shoved her way through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, shrieking at people to return what they'd taken. Some folks just laughed and kept loading their trunks. Others shrugged and walked off. A few looked genuinely confused, especially when Karen tried to block their path. "Ma'am, are you giving these away or not?" one guy asked as he hoisted a box of what looked like security tapes into his van. "No. Those are mine," she snapped, glaring at me like I'd burned down her dollhouse. I stepped forward calmly. "You left them in my garage without my permission. I assumed they were abandoned." Karen turned purple. "That's not how property works. I'm the HOA president. You're obligated." I cut her off. "Actually, you're trespassing. And this is a private property dispute. You want the law involved." I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Because I'd be happy to call the police and explain how you used a garage code override to enter my home while I was out of town." Her mouth opened and closed like a malfunctioning ventriloquist dummy. A few of the onlookers stopped loading and turned to watch us like it was a live-action court show. Sensing the shift in energy, Karen lowered her voice. "Look, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just needed a place to keep some things temporarily." I smiled. "You should have asked. I assumed you'd be reasonable," she muttered. "That was your first mistake." At this point, someone from the crowd chimed in, holding up a small, clear container. "Hey, this box has a check ledger from 2020 with HOA dues and vendor payment. Shouldn't this be in a safe or something?" Karen turned as white as a ghost. "That's not supposed to be here," she whispered. And there it was. The crack in the armor. Karen had been sloppy. For someone who built her personality around control, she had just let half the neighborhood peek behind the curtain. Suddenly, what had started as a petty act of revenge was morphing into something far more satisfying. This wasn't just junk. This was evidence. Receipt. Files. Proof. As Karen scrambled to grab as many folders as she could from the open boxes, I noticed a few neighbors filming the scene with their phones. One guy even narrated like it was a documentary. Here we see the wild Karen in her natural habitat, attempting to rescue her horde from the angry villagers. I nearly choked trying to hold in my laughter. She eventually managed to carry 3 small boxes back to her car before realizing that most of her stash was already in other people's hands or halfway down the road. She made one last attempt to rally sympathy. "You're all going to regret this. This is illegal," she cried. A voice from the crowd piped up. "So is breaking into someone's garage." Karen froze, then stormed back into her car, peeled off without a word, and disappeared down the street. The moment she was gone, someone clapped. Then another. Soon, there was full-blown applause from about a dozen people still milling around, some of them high-fiving like we'd just won a community softball game. It was ridiculous. And perfect. As the last few boxes were taken and the driveway finally cleared, I stood at the edge of my now empty garage, hands on my hips, soaking it all in. Karen had tried to impose control in the name of the HOA. She believed she was above consequence. But the truth was, she'd gambled on my silence and lost everything in front of an audience. That night, I sat on the couch with a cold drink and watched the videos people had uploaded to a local community page. Karen shouting, neighbors hauling boxes, me calmly shutting her down. One video had already gotten hundreds of likes. Someone even set it to dramatic classical music and labeled it Karen vs. the Internet. But even as I enjoyed the victory, I knew this wasn't over. Karen was too proud, too power-drunk to walk away quietly. She would come back, and when she did, she'd be armed with something more than just HOA jargon. The storm was coming. But what she didn't realize yet was that I wasn't the same quiet homeowner she used to push around. She wanted a war? Fine. I'd already won the first battle. 3 days. That's how long it took for Karen to re-emerge from her bunker of rage. I half expected her to show up with police or lawyers, but instead, she went full tyrant mode with her favorite weapon, the HOA emergency meeting. No warning, no notice to the neighborhood, just a printed flyer hastily taped to the community board and slipped under a few select doors. The flyer had more bold lettering than a conspiracy newsletter. Mandatory HOA meeting. Topic: property theft and breach of community trust. The kicker? She didn't even distribute it to everyone. Just her loyal circle of clipboard warriors. Ellen, Greg, the couple from the cul-de-sac who think Halloween is demonic, and of course, Gary, her lapdog treasurer who once fined himself for putting out recycling a day early. Despite the meeting being clearly skewed, I showed up. I brought popcorn. Figuratively, anyway. I also brought my neighbor Sherry, who had recorded one of the more viral videos of Karen's meltdown during the box giveaway. When we walked into the clubhouse, Karen was already seated at the head of the long folding table, looking like a judge ready to sentence me to 20 years in HOA hell. She didn't acknowledge me, just cleared her throat and launched into the performance of a lifetime. She accused me of grand larceny, of orchestrating a public humiliation campaign, of damaging crucial community infrastructure, whatever that meant. Apparently, in her mind, the cardboard boxes were the equivalent of the Liberty Bell, and I had chucked them into a burning dumpster. She passed around a printout of the Craigslist listing, highlighted in aggressive yellow. "This, dear board, is what betrayal looks like," she said, like she was reading from a courtroom drama script. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't bother standing. I just leaned forward and asked a single question. "Karen, did you ever get written permission from me to store your items in my garage?" She hesitated, blinked, then said, "As president of the HOA, I don't need explicit permission for temporary storage in the event of emergency preservation of community records." "Is that in the charter?" I asked. She nodded too quickly. Section 14B. I slowly pulled a stapled packet from my folder. There is no Section 14B. I've read the entire HOA charter. Twice. I even brought copies in case anyone else wants to check. There was a pause. A real, genuine silence as doubt crept in. Gary reached for a copy. Greg leaned forward. Ellen narrowed her eyes. "And for the record," I continued, "I have camera footage of Karen entering my backyard and using the garage panel override while I was out of town. No request. No notice. Just trespassing. That's a crime, by the way." Karen's face twitched. "That footage is inadmissible without a proper warrant. It's my property. My security cameras. I don't need a warrant to watch what happens in my own garage." Gary was now flipping through the charter. His lips moved as he read. Ellen started whispering to the woman beside her. Karen, realizing her momentum was slipping, slammed her hand on the table. "This meeting is not about my actions. It's about community violation." "Exactly," I said calmly. "And I'd like to submit a motion to fine Karen for unauthorized access to a resident's home, unlawful storage of HOA property, and abuse of presidential power." Chaos erupted. Gary's glasses slid down his nose as he fumbled with his notes. Ellen tried to ask a question and got shushed by Karen. But the damage was done. People were talking, doubting, peeking behind the polished curtain of control she'd kept tightly drawn for years. That night, as I walked home, my phone buzzed. Several neighbors texted to say they'd had similar experiences with Karen misusing her position. One person claimed Karen had borrowed their patio chairs for an official HOA event and never returned them. Another said she'd been asked to host an HOA file box for a few weeks, but refused, only to find a passive-aggressive violation notice in her mailbox the next day. Then came the real twist. I got a call from Phil. He's the retired accountant who lives near the back of the neighborhood. Keeps to himself mostly, but always has an ear to the ground. He said, "You might want to check Facebook Marketplace." I asked why. He sent a link. Karen's resale account. Listed under a different name, but the profile picture was unmistakably her dog in a Christmas sweater. And the items for sale? Nearly identical to what had been in my garage. Office furniture, filing cabinets, even a used shredder labeled "lightly used," works great. I stared at the screen, stunned. She wasn't just hoarding HOA materials, She was flipping them for profit. And using neighborhood resources to do it. That explained why she was so frantic to get those boxes back. Not because of privacy or pride, but because she was losing inventory. I took screenshots. All of it. Every listing, every image, every timestamp. Then I made another call, to my cousin, Laura. She's a paralegal. Loves petty justice. When I told her what happened, she said, "Oh, she's cooked. That's mail fraud, misuse of funds, potentially tax evasion if she didn't report the resale income. Want me to help you draft a formal complaint?" Yes. Yes, I did. By the end of the week, I'd assembled a packet so damning it could have doubled as an HBO miniseries. I called it the Karen Report. Inside were testimonies, screenshots, financial inconsistencies, and a copy of the HOA charter with all the fake rules she'd invented highlighted in red. I even included a QR code linking to the garage giveaway video that had now racked up over 12,000 views. Then I distributed it, not to the board, not to Karen, but to every single resident in the neighborhood. Slipped under doors, dropped in mailboxes, emailed where I had addresses. People read it, people talked, people were pissed. Karen had spent years controlling the community like a miniature dictator in pastel sweaters. But she'd gotten greedy and sloppy. She thought no one would challenge her. But now the curtain was ripped down. The whispering had become shouting. And for the first time there was a real, loud, public demand for change. I knew what was coming next. The annual HOA election was only a few days away. And this time people were paying attention. Karen would fight back. She always did. But this time, I had truth, proof, and about 70 of my neighbors behind me. She wasn't ready for what came next. And honestly, neither was I. Election day arrived like a storm cloud that had been brewing for years. The annual HOA meeting had never drawn more than 15 people, most of them dragged in by their spouses or lured with the promise of free coffee. But today? The community center parking lot was packed. People stood in clusters outside the doors, murmuring with a kind of electric anticipation usually reserved for sports finals or courtroom verdicts. You could feel it in the air. Something big was about to happen. And at the center of it all, of course, was Karen. She stood by the check-in table in her usual beige pantsuit, smiling too wide, the corners of her mouth twitching every time someone walked by without acknowledging her. She was flanked by Ellen and Greg, her loyal foot soldiers, both of whom looked less enthusiastic than usual. Maybe it was the buzz of the crowd or the quiet glares from neighbors they used to ignore with impunity, but something was off in their posture. They were nervous, and Karen, despite her practiced poise, couldn't hide the crack forming in her confidence. Inside, the chairs were lined in uneven rows, a folding table placed at the front like a sad version of a presidential debate stage. Karen took her seat dead center, papers neatly arranged, water bottle labeled with her name, as if sheer presentation could save her from what was coming. I took a seat 3 rows back, just close enough to catch her expression but far enough not to appear too eager. Beside me were Sherry and Phil, both armed with copies of the Karen Report and ready to answer any questions. I could see neighbors flipping through the packet as they waited for the meeting to begin, mouths curling in disbelief or amusement as they read through the now infamous screenshots. Karen called the meeting to order with a tight smile and a practiced voice that had commanded this room for years. She moved quickly through the agenda, clearly hoping to limit open discussion before things could turn ugly. But ugly was already in the room, sitting in every chair, holding every document, whispering in every ear. It wasn't just about me or the boxes anymore. It was about years of unchecked control, of manipulative fines, of overreach disguised as order. She reached the final item on the agenda, election of board positions, and paused, as if expecting no one to challenge her usual automatic reappointment. As there are no new nominations, I nominate myself, I said loudly, standing. Every head turned. Karen froze mid-sentence, blinking as if I'd spoken in another language. A beat passed, then someone else raised their hand. Seconded, said Mrs. Patel from down the block, who Karen once fined for her daughter's sidewalk chalk art. Another voice called out from the back, I second that too. A few claps followed. Karen's smile was gone. She gripped the table with both hands, her voice sharp now. That's not proper procedure. Nominations were supposed to be submitted 2 weeks prior. I held up a printed email from the HOA bylaws. Actually, nominations can be made at the meeting if there's a quorum, which we have, probably for the first time in HOA history. A hush fell over the room. She was cornered, and everyone knew it. Gary, the treasurer who had started distancing himself ever since the report came out, cleared his throat and spoke up. He's right. The bylaws allow it. The vote began. Ballots were distributed. People took their time, carefully marking their choice. When the final vote was tallied, Karen stared at the result sheet like it was a death certificate. She had lost. Badly. 72 votes to 12. A landslide. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She just sat there, blinking in disbelief, her world crumbling like a sandcastle against a tide she never thought would come. As the room erupted into applause and scattered cheers, I walked to the front, not to gloat, but to speak. I thanked everyone for showing up, for making their voices heard. I promised transparency, fairness, and a full audit of past decisions. Then I announced the first official act under the new leadership, dissolving all pending fines issued under the bogus rules Karen had invented over the years. The room lit up with applause again, louder this time, with laughter and even a few happy tears. The atmosphere was euphoric. People stood and hugged. Some exchanged numbers. Others made plans for a community barbecue to celebrate. It was like watching a spell being broken in real time. Karen didn't stay to the end. She packed up her papers, muttering something under her breath, and marched out the door, her loyalists trailing behind like confused ducks. No one followed. No one stopped her. She had finally become what she feared most, irrelevant. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses and the air filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and charcoal smoke from early grillers, I sat on my porch and watched kids ride bikes without fear of citations, neighbors chatting freely about their gardens, their dogs, their lives. The community was healing. Slowly maybe, but surely. The fear that had kept people quiet for years had vanished like morning fog. Then something strange happened. A delivery van pulled up to my house. The driver approached with a box in hand, unmarked, taped shut, addressed to me. No sender. No labels. Just a plain cardboard box. I signed for it, curiosity buzzing in my chest. I carried it into the house, set it on the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. Inside was a collection of files. More HOA documents. But these were different. Older. Some yellowed with age, others clearly recently printed. There were internal notes, emails, and a ledger of questionable expenses dating back several years, exorbitant vendor payments, gift purchases labeled as community enrichment, even a receipt for a spa retreat that Karen had marked under leadership development. There was also a folder labeled to be destroyed. I stared at the documents, a cold realization settling in. Someone had dropped this off deliberately. Maybe someone from Karen's circle. Maybe someone finally tired of protecting her. Whatever the case, this was bigger than anything I had found so far. I picked up the phone and called Laura again. She answered on the first ring. So, did she set something on fire yet? Worse, I said, reading through a printed email chain that detailed how Karen had rejected a community park proposal so she could divert the funds to repaint the clubhouse in her favorite color. I think we just found the real reason she wanted those boxes back. Laura sighed. All right. We're going federal with this. As I sat back in my chair, surrounded by the ashes of Karen's empire and the files that might finally bury it for good, I smiled to myself. This wasn't just about a garage anymore. It never really was. This was about power, abuse, entitlement, and finally, consequences. A week after the election, everything felt almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder if the villain is regrouping just off-screen. The neighborhood was healing fast. Lawns looked greener, people waved with genuine smiles, and the shadow that had loomed over every mailbox and garden gnome had finally lifted. Still, something in me refused to fully relax. Karen had vanished from community life entirely. No HOA newsletters, no passive-aggressive memos, not even a complaint about barking dogs. That wasn't her style. She didn't go out quietly. She plotted. And sure enough, the calm broke when a second box showed up on my doorstep. This one wasn't delivered by a courier. There was no knock. I opened the front door to water my plants, and it was just there. Sitting like a secret, wrapped in silence, sealed tight with black duct tape. No markings. No label. No note. Just my name scribbled in thick red ink across the top. I didn't touch it right away. I stared at it for a long time, half expecting it to tick. When I finally opened it, the contents stopped me cold. Inside were more documents, personal ones this time. Not about the HOA. These were files on individual neighbors. Printouts of social media posts. Notes in the margins detailing which residents had received warnings, who had challenged her authority, who had unpaid fines. There were screenshots from neighborhood Facebook groups, and what looked like secretly taken photos of private property. Karen had been running a full-on surveillance operation. One folder was labeled Non-Compliant Watch List. Another read Probation Candidates. I felt sick. There was a line, and Karen hadn't just crossed it, she'd sprinted past it, dragging her clipboard and petty tyranny with her. It became terrifyingly clear that the boxes in my garage weren't just overflow paperwork. They were a fortress of leverage. Karen hadn't just enforced rules. She weaponized them, collecting dirt on neighbors to keep them quiet, to bend them, to control the vote. But why would someone deliver this to me now? I scanned the bottom of the box. Taped beneath the last folder was a handwritten note. No name. Just 4 words. She kept everything. Burn it. The handwriting didn't look like Karen's. Someone else had turned on her. Maybe someone in her inner circle. Maybe someone who'd finally seen enough. I knew I couldn't sit on this. I called Laura again, and by the next day, we were in touch with state authorities. They opened an inquiry. Not just into Karen's leadership, but into the financial activities of the HOA over the past 5 years. It was bigger than anyone imagined. The vendor kickbacks, the overinflated budgets for landscaping and beautification initiatives, the missing community improvement funds, it was all in there. A perfect paper trail, neatly catalogued and bound by the very person who thought no one would ever see it. Within the week, Karen's property was visited by investigators. No flashing lights or handcuffs, yet, but the neighborhood grapevine did its job. People saw. People talked. The walls were closing in. I overheard one neighbor whisper to another at the park. I heard they found a hidden filing cabinet in her attic. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. The spell was broken. Her fortress of fear had crumbled. I thought that might be the end of it, that maybe justice had done its job and I could move on. But then came the final twist. I was sitting in my garage, reorganizing the shelves for the first time in weeks, when I found something tucked behind the backup fridge. A small shoebox-sized container, wedged between the wall and a paint can. I pulled it out, dusted it off, and opened it. Inside were photos. Real, physical print. Not of the neighborhood. Not of fences or lawns. These were of Karen. Smiling. Laughing. Holding hands with a man I didn't recognize. There were postcards from places like Aruba and Costa Rica. Airline ticket. Receipt. One envelope had a different last name. It hit me suddenly. Karen had a secret life. Another identity, maybe even another marriage. Hidden. Sealed away like her secret. And somehow, this box had accidentally ended up in my garage along with the rest of her stash. Now I understood the panic in her eyes that day she found people rummaging through the boxes. It wasn't just HOA dirt. It was personal. She'd hidden everything in my space because she thought no one would dare touch it. And now, it had all unraveled in front of her. A life meticulously built on control and secrets, exposed one accidental box at a time. I didn't keep the box. I didn't dig any deeper. I handed it over to the same investigators and walked away. Not because I didn't want to know more, but because I finally realized it wasn't about Karen anymore. It was about everyone else she'd trampled to keep her tower standing. The HOA transformed after that. We rewrote the bylaws, removed vague clauses, eliminated arbitrary fines. Transparency became the new rule. People felt empowered to speak up, to vote, to participate. We added a community garden. Kids chalked the sidewalks again. Halloween decorations multiplied. And for the first time in years, it felt like a neighborhood again. One Saturday morning, I hosted a yard sale. Not because I needed to sell anything, but because people missed seeing each other. We set up booths, shared lemonade, traded stories. Someone brought music. It felt right. Toward the end of the day, one of the teenagers who'd helped during the original box giveaway came up to me holding his phone. "Dude," he said, grinning. "You're trending again." He showed me the screen. A screenshot of my original Craigslist post had resurfaced on a viral subreddit. Thousands of upvotes, people cheering in the comments. Some even called it the ultimate petty revenge. My favorite comment read, "She weaponized bureaucracy. He weaponized Craigslist. This is the duel of the century." That night, I posted one last ad. Just for fun. I took a photo of the empty garage, swept clean, organized, peaceful. The title said, "Free HOA Presidency. Slightly used. Comes with a bonus shovel for digging up skeletons." It wasn't meant to get attention, but it did. The post went viral again. And this time, it wasn't just about Karen. It was about what we'd built after her. People from other neighborhoods reached out, asking for advice, sharing their own horror stories. Some even sent photos of their own garage makeovers in solidarity. Apparently, HOA reform through pettiness had become a small but mighty movement. Karen eventually sold her house. Quietly. No farewell letter, no goodbyes. One day she was there, the next she was gone. Rumor was she moved out of state. Maybe started fresh somewhere else. Or maybe just found a place where no one knew her history. As for me, I didn't run for HOA president again the next year. I didn't need to. We had a board of real people now. Neighbors, not enforcers. I still get asked about the boxes though. People laugh when they bring it up. It became part of the neighborhood's lore. The time a garage became a revolution. Sometimes all it takes is one act of outrageous entitlement to tip the scales. And one act of bold, delicious revenge to set things right.